Elias Thorne was a man who lived in the negative space of his own life. After the car accident that took his wife, Sarah, and their young son, Leo, Elias didn't just lose his family. He lost his grip on the physical world. As a world-renowned architect, he used to build skyscrapers that touched the clouds, but now, he couldn't even stand the sight of a straight line. 6 months after the funeral, Elias received a strange inheritance. A distant uncle he had never met, Arthur Vane, had left him a property in the remote woods of Black Ridge. The deed came with a single, handwritten note. To the man who builds for the living, I leave the house that builds for the dead. Do not look for the doors. Wait for them to find you. Seeking isolation, Elias drove to the coordinates. He expected a crumbling mansion, but what he found was a structure that defied logic. The house was a jagged, asymmetrical sprawl of gray stone and polished chrome. It sat on the edge of a jagged cliff, looking less like a home and more like a wound in the landscape. As Elias stepped inside, he noticed something unsettling. The internal acoustics were impossible. He dropped his keys on the marble floor, but the sound didn't bounce back. Instead, the sound of the metal hitting the floor seemed to travel away from him, echoing through distant corridors that shouldn't have existed based on the house's exterior. Is anyone here? Elias called out. The echo that returned didn't sound like his voice. It was higher, lighter, a child's giggle. Daddy. The voice was faint, muffled by layers of drywall and shadow, but Elias recognized it instantly. It was Leo. Elias froze. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Now, that's not funny. Who's there? He ran toward the sound, moving through a hallway that seemed to stretch longer with every step he took. The walls were lined with empty picture frames. As he passed them, he caught glimpses of movement in the glass. Not his reflection, but the blurred image of a woman with long, dark hair standing just behind him. He spun around. The hallway was empty. He reached a door at the end of the hall. It was a perfect replica of the bedroom door from his old house, the one Leo used to hide behind during hide-and-seek. With trembling hands, Elias pushed it open. The room inside wasn't a bedroom. It was a vast, hollow cathedral made entirely of blueprints. Thousands of translucent papers hung from the ceiling, swaying in a wind that didn't exist. On every sheet, the designs were the same. A floor plan of the car accident site, drawn over and over again in obsessive detail. In the center of the room stood a drafting table. Sitting there was a figure shrouded in gray silk. You're late, Elias, the figure whispered. The foundation is already pouring. We just need the witness. Elias didn't move. The figure at the drafting table didn't turn around, but the sound of a pencil scratching against vellum filled the silent cathedral of papers. The air smelled of graphite and wet cement. Who are you? Elias demanded, his voice trembling. And how did you get my son's voice? The figure finally turned. It wasn't a person, but a hollow shell made of measuring tapes and sharpened compasses, draped in gray silk. Where a face should have been, there was only a shimmering reflection of the blueprints hanging from the ceiling. I am the architect of Echoes, the entity rasped. Your Uncle Arthur didn't leave you a house, Elias. He left you a debt. This structure is a memory sink. It feeds on the regrets of the broken-hearted to keep its walls standing. I don't care about your debt, Elias spat, stepping forward. I heard my son. Where is he? The architect gestured to the floor. The marble under Elias's feet began to turn translucent. Beneath the surface, he saw a labyrinth of pipes, but instead of water, they were filled with a glowing, golden mist. Within the mist, tiny scenes played out in a loop. Leo blowing out candles on his 4th birthday, Sarah laughing in the kitchen, the moment before the brakes failed on the rain-slicked highway. The house has captured their echoes, the architect explained. When a soul leaves this world violently, they leave a resonance behind. This house is a magnifying glass for that sound. You can see them, Elias. You can live with them again. But a house made of echoes requires a constant supply of breath. What does that mean? It means the house grows by taking your now to build your then. Every hour you spend here with the echo of your son, you lose an hour of your own reality. Look at your hands, architect. Elias looked down. His fingertips were turning gray, the skin becoming textured like old parchment. His wedding ring felt loose, as if his very bones were shrinking. Suddenly, the giggle returned. It was louder this time, coming from a staircase that appeared out of thin air against the far wall. "Daddy, come find me. Now." Elias ignored the architect and sprinted toward the stairs. As he climbed, the architecture began to shift. The straight lines of the stairs curved into a spiral that shouldn't have been physically possible. The walls bled wet ink, and the ceiling lowered until Elias was crawling through a vent that smelled like his old SUV. He emerged into a room that was a perfect, terrifyingly accurate recreation of Leo's nursery. Every toy was in the right place. The glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling were shining. Sitting in the corner, with his back to Elias, was a small boy in blue pajamas. "Now," Elias whispered, tears blurring his vision. The boy turned around. He had Leo's hair and Leo's pajamas, but his face was a shifting mosaic of blueprint lines. His eyes were two black ink dots that seemed to weep onto his cheeks. "You took too long to break, Daddy," the boy echo said, his voice a distorted recording. "Why didn't you stop the car?" The nursery didn't just feel cold, it felt heavy. As the boy echo spoke, the floorboards groaned under Elias's feet as if he suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. Each word from the ink-eyed child was a stone added to his back. "I tried, Leo," Elias choked out, falling to his knees. The road was slick, the brakes, they just didn't hold. "An architect calculates friction," the boy echo replied, his voice layering over itself like a chorus of ghosts. "An architect understands structural failure. You saw the clouds, Daddy. You saw the rain. But you wanted to get home fast. You built the bridge to our grave." The walls of the nursery began to lean inward. The cheerful yellow wallpaper started to peel, revealing dark, damp concrete underneath. The stars on the ceiling didn't just glow. They began to drip like burning oil. Elias tried to stand, but the air was thickening. It felt like breathing through wet wool. This was the house's mechanism, the compression. It took the abstract weight of guilt and turned it into literal atmospheric pressure. "The foundation is settling," the architect's voice echoed through the vents. "Guilt is the strongest mortar we have. It never cracks. It never ages." Suddenly, the door to the nursery slammed shut, and the window vanished, replaced by a solid wall of brick. The room was shrinking. The dresser moved 6 inches closer. The bed slid toward him. "Stop it!" Elias screamed, clawing at the floor. "Sarah, Sarah, help me!" From the shadows under the bed, a hand reached out. It was slender, pale, and wearing a familiar silver watch, the one Elias had given Sarah for their anniversary. But as she pulled herself out, she wasn't the woman he remembered. Her body was composed of shattered safety glass, held together by a flickering, translucent light. Every time she moved, the sound of a car crash, metal twisting, glass spraying, erupted from her joints. "Elias," the Sarah echo whispered, her voice like wine through a broken windshield. "Why are you still breathing? The air belongs to us." She crawled toward him, her glass fingers leaving deep scores in the hardwood floor. As she reached him, she didn't embrace him. She placed her hand on his chest, and Elias felt his ribs groan under the pressure. The house was using her to crush the life out of him, turning his lungs into a memory sink. You aren't them," Elias gasped, his vision spotting with black. "You're just the house's blueprints." "Does it matter?" the glass woman asked, her face a jagged mirror reflecting Elias's own terrified expression. "In this house, the blueprint is the reality. We are the only family you have left. Stay with us. Give us your breath, and the walls will stop moving." The room was now so small that Elias's shoulders touched both side walls. He was trapped in a box of his own grief, with the echoes of his failures pressing the air out of his body. Just as the walls were about to crush Elias into a pulp of bone and regret, his hand struck a loose floorboard. It didn't feel like wood, it felt like a gap in a digital code. He shoved his fingers into the crack and pulled. The floor didn't break, it folded. Elias tumbled through the opening, falling not into another room, but into the crawl space of the unbuilt. He landed on a pile of discarded sketches and rotted vellum. Above him, the nursery walls snapped shut with a sound like a giant's teeth closing, but he was no longer there. He was in a narrow, flickering corridor that existed between the rooms. This was the house's skeletal system, the place where the pipes of golden mist were exposed. The air here was thin and tasted of old dust, but the crushing pressure of the guilt was gone. Propped against a support beam made of rusted iron was a skeleton draped in a tweed jacket. In its lap sat a leather-bound journal. "Uncle Arthur," Elias whispered. He opened the journal. The handwriting was frantic, the ink smeared by tears. "The architect is a liar. He does not build for the dead. He builds a cage for the living. The echoes are not souls. They are parasites made of sound and memory. They feed on the vibration of regret. To kill an echo, you must stop the vibration. You must forgive the unforgivable." Elias turned the page and found a hand-drawn map of the house. In the very center was a room labeled the Silence. The architect cannot enter the silence. It is the only room without a blueprint. It is the space where nothing is calculated. To reach it, you must stop running from the crash and walk directly into the center of the impact. Suddenly, the walls of the crawl space began to hum. The golden pipes nearby turned a violent, bruised purple. The house knew he was in the system. "You are wandering in the margins, Elias," the architect's voice boomed, sounding like 1,000 hammers hitting an anvil. "A building cannot stand with a flaw in the crawl space. I am sending the inspectors to remove you." From the shadows at the end of the narrow passage, shapes began to emerge. They were tall, spindly creatures made of sharpened rulers and heavy lead weights. Their heads were giant, ticking metronomes. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Every tick of their heads sent a shockwave of physical pain through Elias's skull. They were the personification of lost time. Elias looked at the map. The Silence was located behind the kitchen, the place where the family last ate together before the trip. He had to get there, but the inspectors were closing in, their metronomes accelerating into a frantic, heart-stopping rhythm. "I didn't mean to kill them." Elias shouted at the shadows. The metronomes stopped. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. "Then why?" A new voice whispered, Sarah's voice, but without the glass distortion. "Is your heart beating in the rhythm of a funeral drum?" Elias scrambled through the narrowing crawl space, the journal clutched to his chest. He kicked through a wall of brittle drywall and tumbled into a room that froze the blood in his veins. It was the kitchen, but it was a grotesque, funhouse version of it. The tiles on the floor were shifting like a liquid mosaic. On the table sat 3 plates of steaming pasta, their last meal. The smell of garlic and basil was so strong it felt like a physical blow, a sensory ghost of a life that no longer existed. "Elias, you're not eating," a voice said. He turned. Sarah was sitting at the table. She wasn't the glass monster from the nursery. She looked perfect, her hair tucked behind her ear, her eyes bright with life. Next to her, Leo was playing with a toy car, making quiet zooming noises. "This isn't real," Elias whispered, his back against the vibrating refrigerator. "This is the trap." "Why does it have to be a trap?" Sarah asked softly, tilting her head. "We can stay here forever, Elias. No rain, no haigues, no brax. Just this moment. Isn't this what you wanted?" The inspectors, the spindly metronome creatures, were standing in the corners of the room, their pendulum heads swaying slowly. Tick, tock, tick, tock. They weren't attacking. They were waiting. They were the inspectors of choice, ensuring he stayed within the boundaries of the memory. I would give anything," Elias sobbed, reaching toward her. "Then give us your memory of the after," Sarah said, her voice becoming slightly distorted. "Forget the hospital. Forget the coffins. Give that space in your brain to the house, and we will be whole again." Elias reached for her hand, but as his fingers brushed hers, he felt the cold texture of wet blueprints. He looked down at the table. The pasta wasn't food. It was coiled measuring tapes covered in gray ink. He remembered Arthur's journal. To kill an echo, you must stop the vibration. The vibration was his own longing. He was the battery for this entire room. The more he wanted this lie to be true, the more solid the walls became. "No," Elias said, pulling his hand back. "You died, Sarah. I watched them bury you. If I stay here, I'm just an architect building a tomb for himself." The perfect image of Sarah flickered. Her skin began to crack into shards of glass again. The warm kitchen light turned a sickly, bruised purple. The inspector's metronomes suddenly sped up. "Tick, tick, tick, tick. You're breaking the blueprint," the architect's voice roared from the ceiling. "The foundation is cracking." The floor beneath the table began to split open. A dark, bottomless chasm of black ink yawned wide. The inspectors lunged forward, their sharpened ruler limbs swinging like scythes. Elias didn't run for the door. He looked at the map in the journal. The silence was under the kitchen. "I'm sorry," Elias whispered to the flickering image of his family, "but I have to let you go." He didn't jump into the chasm out of fear. He stepped into it out of acceptance. As he fell into the black ink, the sound of the ticking metronomes vanished, replaced by a terrifying, absolute roar of wind. The fall felt like an eternity, but Elias didn't hit solid ground. He landed in a shallow pool of what felt like cold, liquid shadow. As he stood up, his eyes adjusted to a world of gray. This was the substructure, the dark basement of the psyche where the house's heavy lifting was done. The walls here weren't made of stone or wood. They were made of stacked suitcases, old letters, and discarded wedding rings. Millions of them. It was a landfill of human attachment. "Who's there?" Elias called out. His voice didn't echo. Here, the air was so thick with grief that it swallowed sound entirely. "Another pillar for the porch," a voice rasped from the gloom. Elias turned to see a man sitting on a throne of rusted bird cages. He was ancient, his skin so thin it looked like translucent vellum, and his eyes were stitched shut with copper wire. This was the first echo. "You're not the architect," Elias said, clutching Arthur's journal. "No," the old man wheezed. "I'm the one who hired him. Centuries ago, I lost a daughter to the fever, and I asked for a place where her laugh would never fade. I didn't realize that a house built on a scream needs a foundation of bones." The first echo reached out a trembling hand. "You are a thorn. We are the blood architects. Every few generations, the house calls one of us back to reinforce the walls. Your Uncle Arthur tried to hide you, but the house always smells of fresh regret." Suddenly, the suitcases around them began to rattle. A low, rhythmic thumping started in the floor, the heartbeat of the house. "The architect is coming for your core memory, Elias," the first echo warned. "He doesn't just want a grief. He wants the one memory that still makes you smile. He wants to turn your last bit of light into the house's fuel. If he takes it, you will become like me, a hollow reed for the house to whistle through." Elias thought of the memory he kept tucked away in the deepest part of his heart. The morning Leo was born, the sun hitting the hospital window, and the first time the boy's tiny hand had gripped his thumb. It was the only thing the accident hadn't touched. "The core is located in the master bedroom," the first echo whispered, his voice fading. "But the architect has turned the hallway into a hall of mirrors. You will see every version of the life you didn't live. If you look at them, you stay. If you close your eyes, you fall into the void." The black ink at Elias's feet began to rise, swirling into a staircase that led upward into a blinding, sterile white light. "How do I defeat him?" Elias asked. "An architect knows," the old man replied. "A house is only as strong as its weakest joint. Find a flaw in your own story." Elias began to climb. Behind him, the first echo dissolved into a pile of gray dust. His duty of warning finally finished. Elias emerged from the black ink into a corridor so bright it burned. The walls were made of polished silver, reflecting infinite versions of the same hallway. But these weren't just reflections, they were windows. As he walked, he saw himself in the first window. He was older, grayer, sitting on a porch with Sarah. They were watching a teenage Leo play basketball in the driveway. It was a world where he had checked the weather, seen the storm, and decided to stay at the hotel. "It looks so real," Elias whispered, his hand drifting toward the glass. "It is real," the architect's voice sang, no longer harsh but smooth and comforting. "In the realm of possibility, every choice exists. Why choose the world where they are bones and ash? Step through, Elias. Take the exit. Leave the blueprint of pain behind. In the next window, he saw a world where the car had spun, but everyone had walked away with only scratches. He saw the three of them laughing at a diner later that night, shaking from the adrenaline, celebrating their survival. Elias felt a pull in his chest, a literal, physical tugging at his heart. The silver walls were acting like magnets, drawing the core memory out of him. He felt his knees weaken, the urge to smash the glass and dive into the happy lie was almost overwhelming. To kill an echo, you must stop the vibration. Arthur's words echoed in his mind. Elias realized that these alternate lives were the ultimate vibration. They were the what-ifs that kept his soul in a state of constant, agonizing tremor. As long as he looked at them, he was providing the house with the energy of 1,000 unlived years. He closed his eyes. "Coward," the architect screamed, the voice instantly shifting back to a tectonic roar. "Look at them. Look at what you threw away." The mirrors began to shatter. Shards of perfect lives flew past Elias's head, cutting his cheeks. He felt the cold air of the void pressing in from the holes in the walls. He kept his eyes shut, moving forward by feeling the wall with his hand. He stumbled over a piece of furniture, a bed frame. He was no longer in the hall. The air smelled of lavender and old wood. He opened his eyes. He was in the master bedroom, but it wasn't the room from the Black Ridge house. It was his and Sarah's real bedroom from their old home. The curtains were fluttering in a soft breeze. On the nightstand sat the silver watch, ticking softly, and standing at the foot of the bed was the architect. But he wasn't draped in silk anymore. He had taken the form of Elias himself, a version of Elias with eyes made of hollow, dark blueprints. "This is the end of the line, architect," Elias said, his voice steady. "I'm not a pillar. I'm the one who tears the building down." The figure at the foot of the bed didn't move. It was like looking into a distorted mirror. This shadow, Elias, wore the same clothes, had the same scars on his hands, but his presence felt like a structural collapse. He was the embodiment of Elias's self-loathing. "You speak of tearing things down," the shadow Elias said, his voice a perfect, hollow mimicry. "But you only know how to build monuments to your own failure. This house is your masterpiece, Elias. You designed every brick of this misery with your own thoughts." The architect, the entity behind the shadow, began to pull the room apart. The walls of the bedroom didn't just fall, they unspooled like rolls of film. The floor turned into a vast drafting table, and Elias found himself standing on a giant sheet of blueprints. "I found the map, architect," Elias said, holding up Arthur's journal. "I know about the silence. I know about the flaw." The shadow laughed, a sound like glass grinding in a mortar. "The flaw isn't in the house, you fool. The flaw is in the man. Every Thorne believes they can outdesign death. Your Uncle Arthur thought he could hide in the walls. He died a skeleton in a crawl space. Do you want that for yourself?" The shadow stepped forward, and with every step, the room grew darker. The echoes of Sarah and Leo appeared behind the shadow, their forms flickering like dying candles. They weren't speaking anymore. They were just weeping, a low, rhythmic sound that matched the house's heartbeat. "Look at them," the shadow commanded. "They are fading because you are fighting the house. If you don't submit, they will be erased forever. No memories, no echoes, just nothing." Elias felt the pressure returning. It wasn't the physical weight this time. It was the psychological terror of losing them a second time. If he destroyed the house, he destroyed the only place where he could still hear their voices. "A house is only as strong as its weakest joint," the first echo had said. Elias looked at the shadow Elias. He looked at the blueprint floor. He saw the lines connecting the accident, the house, and his own heart. Then he saw it. The weakest joint wasn't his grief. It was his certainty. He was certain he was guilty. He was certain he deserved to suffer. He was certain that the accident was the only thing that defined him. That certainty was the mortar holding the architect's world together. "You're wrong," Elias whispered. "I didn't build this house. You did. You took my pain and used it as a tool. But tools can be broken." Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out the one thing the shadow didn't have. The small, rusted compass he had used since he was a student. It was a tool of creation, not of haunting. He didn't attack the shadow. He knelt down and stabbed the compass into the blueprint floor, right at the center of the master bedroom design. "I revoke the design," Elias stated. The shadow Elias let out a piercing shriek. The ink on the floor began to bleed upward, turning into a black tide. The moment the compass pierced the vellum floor, the logic of the house shattered. This shadow, Elias, didn't just disappear. He began to unravel like a loose sweater. The ink bled from his eyes, dripping onto the floor and dissolving the very lines that formed the master bedroom. "You cannot UN design what has already been lived," the architect's voice roared, but the sound was thin, like paper tearing. The house began to fold. This wasn't a normal collapse. It was a geometric nightmare. The ceiling swapped places with the floor. The walls turned into liquid ink that splashed against Elias, cold and smelling of iron. The furniture, the bed, the nightstand, the silver watch, distorted into jagged black triangles and vanished into the void. Elias sprinted. He didn't run toward a door, because doors no longer existed. He ran toward the center of the bleed. According to the map, the silence wasn't a place you arrived at. It was a place that remained when everything else was gone. As he ran, the architect threw one final obstacle in his path. The hallway suddenly materialized again, but it was filled with thousands of Sarahs and Leos. They weren't alternate versions. They were the drafts, the failed attempts the house had made to recreate his family. Some were missing faces, some were made of stone, some were just voices screaming in the dark. "Stay with us, Elias," the choir of drafts shrieked. "If the house goes, we go into the dark." Elias felt a hand grab his ankle. It was a Sarah made of wet clay. "Don't leave me in the silence, Elias. It's so cold there." The guilt flared up, a white-hot spike in his chest. This was the architect's final weapon, weaponized compassion. The entity was trying to make Elias feel responsible for the death of the house's illusions. "You aren't her," Elias whispered, his voice thick with tears. "She's already in the silence, and that's where I'm going." He kicked free from the clay hand and dove into the black tide of ink. The world went white. Not the sterile white of the Hall of Realities, but a soft, muffled white, like the world after a heavy snowfall. The roaring of the house, the screaming of the drafts, and the ticking of the metronomes stopped instantly. Elias was standing in a room with no walls. There were no blueprints on the floor. There was no architect. There was only a single wooden chair in the middle of a vast, empty space. Sitting on the chair was a woman. She was holding a small boy in her lap. They weren't made of glass, or ink, or blueprints. They were just there. They didn't have the glow of the echoes. They were quiet. "Sarah?" Elias asked. She looked up. Her eyes were her own. She didn't smile, and she didn't weep. She just looked at him with a profound, quiet recognition. "This is the room without a design," she said. Her voice didn't echo. It stayed right there between them. The architect couldn't build this, because there is no regret here. Only the truth. "What is the truth?" Elias asked, stepping closer. Leo reached out his small hand, and for the first time since the accident, Elias felt the warmth of his son's skin. It wasn't a trick of the house. It was the memory stripped of the pain. "The truth," Sarah said, "is that the house was never the cage. You were." The silence was heavy, but it wasn't the weight of guilt. It was the weight of peace. For the first time in months, Elias's mind was quiet. There was no architect to scream at him, no walls to crush him, and no what-ifs to haunt him. He knelt beside Sarah and Leo. He could feel the soft fabric of Sarah's sweater and the faint scent of the soap Leo used. In this room, they were whole. "I can stay here," Elias whispered, a desperate hope rising in his chest. "The house is gone. The architect is defeated. We can just exist here." Sarah looked at him, her expression tender but firm. "Elias, look at your hands." Elias looked down. His fingers were no longer turning to parchment, but they were becoming translucent. He could see the white void right through his palms. He wasn't becoming a ghost. He was becoming a void. "This room is the silence because nothing can grow here," Sarah explained. "It is a pause in the music. If you stay, you aren't living with us. You're simply stopping your own heart. The world outside still has straight lines, Elias. It still has rain and wind and people who are still breathing. But they aren't there, Elias sobbed, clutching Leo's hand. If I leave this room, I lose you. Forever. No, Leo said, his voice small and clear. If you leave, you take us with you. The architect used our echoes to build a cage. But a memory isn't a cage, Daddy. It's a light. Sarah stood up, pulling Leo with her. They began to fade, their forms turning into soft, golden sparks. The house is gone, Elias, Sarah said, her voice receding like a distant melody. Go build something for the living. Build something that doesn't need to be haunted to stand. The white void began to ripple. A single line appeared in the distance, a horizontal line, the horizon. Elias reached out one last time, but his hands passed through the golden sparks. He closed his eyes, not in fear, but in acceptance. He let out a long, slow breath, the breath the house had been trying to steal for centuries, and let it go. Elias woke up with a jolt. He was lying on the damp earth of Black Ridge. The sun was rising over the cliffside, casting long, orange shadows across the ground. He looked back at where the house had stood. There was nothing there. No gray stone, no polished chrome, no asymmetrical towers. There was only a foundation of old, cracked concrete, overgrown with weeds and wildflowers. The House of Echoes had never been a physical structure. It was a manifestation of the Thorne family's shared grief, a psychic parasite that had finally run out of fuel. Elias stood up. His body felt light. The crushing pressure in his chest was gone. He reached into his pocket and found a rusted compass. It was still there, solid and real. Next to it was the note from Uncle Arthur, but the ink had faded away, leaving the paper blank. He walked his car, parked on the dirt road. He sat in the driver's seat and looked at the rearview mirror. For the first time since the accident, he didn't look for the ghosts of Sarah and Leo in the back seat. He just looked at himself. He turned the key. The engine hummed to life. He looked at the road ahead, a long, winding path that led out of the woods and back toward the city. Elias Thorne, the architect, began to drive. He didn't drive fast, and he didn't drive slow. He just drove, finally understanding that he didn't need to build walls to keep his family close. He carried the blueprint of their love in his heart, and that was the only structure that would never fall. As the car disappeared into the distance, a single, golden spark drifted over the old ruins of the house, then vanished into the morning light.